Welcome, everyone, to the Week 5 Waiver Wire Show presented by the 33rd Team. I am your host, as always, Josh Larky, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Ryan Reynolds. For the first time this year, we have 4 teams on bye ahead of Week 5 action. The Chargers, the Browns, the Buccaneers, and the Seahawks. Put another way, we are actually losing a lot of fantasy-relevant players this week, and even though the waiver wire is not particularly fruitful, we're still going to talk about a few guys that we might not talk about in some other weeks, simply because you're probably going to be flexing some significantly worse players than you have through these first 4 weeks of action. Fortunately, at the top, we do have a very exciting waiver wire ad, and that is Jameson Williams. The suspension has been reduced. He is now eligible to play Week 5 against Carolina. What we've seen from Josh Reynolds in his place as the outside downfield receiver, Reynolds has averaged 5 targets a game, 3 catches, 54 receiving yards. He scored twice in 4 games, and he's averaged 11.5 fantasy points a game. I think we both agree Jameson Williams is better, and that hopefully Reynolds' performance is, ideally it's a little bit of a floor outcome, and that we're looking closer to 12, 13, 14 fantasy points a game from the former first-round pick, who I think in many ways projects as one of the NFL's premier field stretchers. What do you want to add about JMO in terms of what have you seen out of this Lions offense so far, and how will he fit into it?
Yeah, for me, I'm more excited about his macro impact on what Detroit can do, because the one thing they don't have is, like you said, an elite field stretcher. He brings that to the table. For fantasy purposes, I view him more as a stash, where he was inconsistent in the time you saw last year. Obviously, he missed the first 4 games due to suspension, so the ceiling's very interesting, but I wouldn't play him this week, for instance, in the overwhelming majority of scenarios. So stash him. Let's see what happens over the next few weeks.
We got a really interesting question in our Discord. Our Discord is free to join. Any of our articles are also free on the33rdteam.com. You can see the Discord linked in there. You can find the Discord linked on my Twitter at JLarkyTweets. You can find it linked in Ryan's Twitter at Ryan Reynolds NFL. Someone asked, Jameson Williams or Quentin Johnston? And I think that's a very, very good question. 2 first-round picks. It seems like we would both lean slightly towards Quentin Johnston simply because of the Chargers offense. Is there anything else you want to add there? I don't think we need to overcomplicate it. Justin Herbert he's going to pass more. He's going to pass more efficiently than Jared Goff. And Austin Eckler is a very different archetype of running back than David Montgomery in terms of what these game plans look like.
Yeah, agreed. Chargers are more pass-centric offense. I think both of these guys are guys you're looking to have them peak late, so I'd lean Johnston over Williams as well.
All right, let's move on now to the Broncos backfield. Samaje Perine has a hip, or Javonte Williams has a hip injury. He's probably missing this week. He might miss the next week as well. It's a little bit cloudy. I'd say the timeline looks like 1 to 3 games missed maximum. And in his place, that would be Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin. You and I talked pre-show, and it seems like we'd both lean Samaje Perine very slightly for sort of the more stable, controlled floor in fantasy. McLaughlin's the more explosive player. He's going to have the big playability. But if we just look at usage over the past 2 games, Samaje Perine has averaged about 50% more snaps per game. He's been out-carried very slightly by McLaughlin, but the bigger back, Samaje Perine, has more red zone carries per game the past 2 games, and he's been running more routes and receiving more targets in the pass game. I think we can kind of look at Perine McLaughlin as the poorest man's version of what Detroit is doing right now with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. I see Ryan pondering that, and I mean this as truly the poorest man's, where we do not like this Denver offense all that much. And I'd say this looks like a 50-50-ish timeshare, give or take, where I think we're hoping for 12 fantasy points from either of them in any of these weeks.
Yeah, I don't have high hopes for either, especially this week against the Jets. But like you said, Perine safer, getting more high value touches. I do think McLaughlin has more ceiling week to week, but he's also more volatile.
Let's turn to the Packers receivers. I'm pretty excited about them. And especially Romeo Doubs, who I have previously said I prefer Jaden Reed to. You know what? Strong opinions loosely held. We have flip-flops. Christian Watson returns for Thursday Night Football this past week. He only ran 19 routes. Romeo Doubs led the team with 36 for context. So Watson's out there about half the time. Romeo Doubs had a 38% target share in this game, 13 targets. He caught 9 for 95 yards. And if we just look at the season in general now, Doubs has averaged just over 8 targets per game, while Reed has been at 6. Their actual receiving yardage is pretty similar. Reed's been a touch more efficient, but I think ultimately we should probably chase the targets a little bit more here. Jaden Reed, my expected fantasy points model has him at 12 fantasy points a game, but Romeo Doubs is at 15 fantasy points a game based on usage and has in fact scored 15 fantasy points a game. So my usage model does not think any of this Romeo Doubs scoring has been a mirage. And if we're looking at bids, JMO's probably a 15%-ish bid. And I think if you really just want some stability at receiver, you can go close to that for Romeo Doubs as well. Whereas I think the Broncos running back duo, we're probably trying to bid 8 to 12, 8 to 13% on those guys. So I think Doubs is really the one that I'm going after here, but I think Reed probably still worthy 6% of your fab budget if you need some flex appeal and then potential late season breakout from a rookie receiver. What do you want to add here about Doubs? And have you been impressed just watching him on film? Because last year the film was littered with big plays and drops. Has he cleaned up his act for year 2?
I think he's fine. He's a solid contested catch player. He's not really my archetype, so to say, but if you need a bye week fill-in over the next few weeks, I think Doubs is definitely safer than Jaden Reed. Reed's more of a, like you said, I'm looking for Reed to peak late in the season, money-making season, fantasy playoffs. He's more of a deeper league bench stash for now.
Guys, that is Ryan Reynolds, NFL on Twitter. His power rankings are on the site. Make sure you check them out, the33rdteam.com. He's going to have game-by-game previews coming out later this week. Saturday, he'll be dropping kind of what he's betting on in each game, essentially. My fantasy rankings will be on the site later today, and special because we're now a month into the season. I have tiered rest of season rankings that will be dropping on the site tomorrow. Very excited for everyone to see those. Slightly different format. Ryan and I are actually meeting later this afternoon just to kind of go over them and make sure that as we set up a cross-positional trade value chart associated with these rest of season rankings, that it's all trades that we ourselves would personally endorse. Because let me tell you, I hate few things more than one of those trade value charts where you put 3 players together who you will never start, and then Tyreek Hill joins your squad. We will not let anyone be losing Tyreek Hill casually like that. Someone who is certifiably not Tyreek Hill is Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yeah.
Great transition right there. Wan'Dale Robinson. We talked about him last week. We were a little excited. He was targeted 5 times on 9 routes in his week 3 return. Last night on Monday Night Football, it was an absolute disaster for nearly every Giants player except for maybe Matt Breida and Wan'Dale Robinson. Wan'Dale Robinson ran 32 routes. That's a lot more than 9 the previous week. Darren Waller led the team with 44. So you're looking at like 75% of the routes in week 2 for him. This is basically his week 2 coming off the ACL tear. It's very encouraging. Targeted 6 times, caught 5 for 40. Ultimately, though, I will dampen the enthusiasm. If you're not in a PPR league, I think you can leave him on waivers. PPR, I think he's a 5-6% type fab guy, where during these bye weeks, you can flex him and you're probably not going to get burned by it. Anything to add here? I actually thought he looked, correct me if I'm wrong, but like reasonably explosive with the ball in his hands last night. Kind of like the lone bright spot at times for the Giants.
Yeah, I think when he caught a pass last night, it stood out a little bit. You know, we talked about this with Jordan last night, actually. I think Jalen Hyatt's the best receiver in this group long term. I think Wan'Dale Robinson's second. They have very different skill sets. One of the things that's semi-exciting about Robinson in the short term is the Giants have the Dolphins and the Bills on deck. We saw the Seahawks pass rush completely smoke Daniel Jones last week. So obviously the Giants are going to more quick hitters going forward. That plays right in a Wan'Dale Robinson skill set. Similarly, Daniel Jones is good on in-breaking routes, short to intermediate in-breaking routes, crossers, drags, slants, also right in Wan'Dale Robinson's wheelhouse. So I could see his role growing over the next few weeks. So if you want him, I'd get him now. You're on mute, Josh.
Whoops. Let's turn to someone we're very excited about. I'm so excited I had to mute my loud voice. It is Jake Ferguson, Dallas Cowboys tight end. He's now averaging more than 6 targets per game, 2.5 red zone targets per game. That is hard to find at the tight end position. And one thing we've talked about him basically every week because we are just fans of whoever the Dallas Cowboys tight end is in general. He finally ran a full set of routes for the first time in week 4. It was very encouraging. He'd been kind of a part-time, like a 2/3 of the routes type player, ran nearly all the routes this past week. And my expected fantasy points model based on usage, which is available in all my fantasy rankings tables, which are free on the 33rdteam.com. Hey, my model thinks he should be averaging 10.5 PPR points a game, 6th most at the position. For those wondering who's ahead of him, Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, Zach Ertz, Cole Kmet, Mark Andrews, and then Jake Ferguson with Sam Laporta. Very, very close behind. So the usage is good. It's an offense that in some ways is like almost underperformed, even though they've been blowing teams out. And this is someone where if you were like a Kyle Pitts drafter, I could see myself bidding 10 to 15% fab on this guy if you really need someone like that. What do you want to add here about Jake Ferguson, who I think is officially taken on the Dalton Schultz role?
We're heading into week 5, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be no tight ends available very soon. So if Ferguson's there, he's probably the last or second to last guy that's actually startable. If you're like Josh said, if you're in trouble at the position, you got someone like Kyle Pitts who's volatile. I'm pairing him with just Jake Ferguson right now.
Let's turn to Gus Edwards. People might be like, why are you talking about Gus Edwards again? Well, he looked like a total workhorse with his usage this past week. Justice Hill returned from the toe injury, but he barely played. Ultimately, Gus Edwards played 39 snaps. Melvin Gordon played 10. Justice Hill played 6. So Gus Edwards almost never left the field. He had 15 carries. No other running back had more than 3 in this game. And he ran 14 routes. No other running back ran more than 4. He was targeted 3 times on his 14 routes. I don't have the stats up in front of me. I should have pulled them up, but I think Gus Edwards has like 12 career targets. It's something absolutely ridiculous. This could very well have been like 20% of his career targets. I'm going to look this up right now. And while I do, Ryan, what did you see from Gus Edwards? Because ultimately this guy was kind of a bell cow sneakily this past week, and that might be a sign of things to come.
You know, over the course of his career, he's been a solid runner. And like, you know, we've said this many times over the last several years. Anyone who gets to play alongside Lamar Jackson in that backfield, Jackson just creates space. He creates room. So I like Edwards from that standpoint. And Todd Monken, running backs in the past, have caught a lot of passes. So maybe Gus Edwards just falls into that role due to the lack of there being any other reliable player in that backfield. But yeah, I would temper my expectations a little bit. But then again, if you don't have a running back 2 option, Gus Edwards there's worse ideas than Gus Edwards.
I pulled it up, guys. He's averaged 6 targets per season over the past 4 years. He had 3 targets this past week.
Wow. Yeah.
Todd Monken is officially here, and he's here for Gus Edwards. Let's turn to Josh Downs. Josh Downs, now the slot receiver for the Colts, the clear number 2 target ahead of Alec Pierce. He's averaged 7 targets, 4 catches, 40 yards a game. He's a 3rd-round rookie. As we always talk about with these rookie receivers, they generally peak as the season goes along. He's averaged nearly a full red zone target per game, despite being tiny. And that's very encouraging because one thing we're probably not going to get a lot of from Wan'Dale Robinson is red zone targets. Josh Downs actually might be like kind of like the higher upside version of him potentially. The average depth of target is 6 yards. That is not great. That is why I like Wan'Dale. Josh Downs, almost exclusively a PPR option. Ryan, you were very high on him throughout the draft process. He went to a landing spot where I think we were just simply hoping that Richardson hits because it was probably not going to be a high volume pass attack.
Right.
I think we've been very, very excited so far with what the passing offenses looked like. How do you see Downs rest of season now that Richardson is arriving quicker than expected?
Yeah, Richardson's been better than expected as a passer early in his career. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was happening late, but it happening this early where he's been fine in that realm is really encouraging. This week specifically against the Titans, I think this could be a Josh Downs week if he's going to have one. Titans pass rush is significant. Colts offensive line is okay, but the Titans could still create some margin there. So quick hitters are Josh Downs could be part probably this week, but like, long view. I mean, what is 5-6 targets a lot in a game for him? Would you say, Josh, right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, we're talking like, a bye week filling in PPR in most cases, maybe 9 to 11 points. So, don't have great expectations, but I do think if you're in trouble this week, I think he's pretty playable.
Yeah, I'd agree. We like this Titans matchup. Another guy to discuss would be wide receiver Michael Wilson. ultimately we're getting more optimistic about the outlook of this Cardinals passing offense. It's been pretty good with Josh Dobbs. It should be even better whenever Kyler Murray returns. I think we're hoping in the next 4 to 5 weeks. Michael Wilson had a target share in each game under 13%. And then suddenly week 4, the target share ticks up a little bit to 17%. Still not great, but it's encouraging. He's a rookie from the 3rd round. We should expect him to be a little more slow played. He caught all 7 of his targets for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think ultimately he has kind of earned more looks going forward with that kind of performance. But I think we'd both say he's just a stash. He was still clearly behind both Marquise Brown and Zach Ertz for targets. Yeah, when bye week fill-in kind of guy. We have to mention him because he scored twice and he caught all 7 of his targets. But I wouldn't expect to actually consider starting him for at least like 3 to 4 more weeks.
Yeah, he's a deep league stash to me. I think if the Coach of the Year award versus the conditions that it's based on, I think Gannon's the Coach of the Year through the first 4 games, because this Cardinal team giving people games, beating the Cowboys, is no one expected this to happen. And on top of that, they're playing the Bengals this week, and Cardinals might actually beat them. Wouldn't have even considered that as a possibility a month ago. So that's actually my reason for being somewhat interested in Wilson, because the Cardinals are just overachieving. So then again, like unless if I have 5 bench spots, I Michael Wilson wouldn't make any of my teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been fun to see how good this Cardinals offense looked. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Gannon was, what was he, the defensive coordinator of the Eagles prior to this job? And I mean, it hits close to home. Former Rams defensive coordinator Brandon Staley has been the Chargers head coach. As a diehard Chargers fan, I cannot say I have been particularly impressed with the offense through most of Justin Herbert's career. It's felt like the offensive scheme has held him back. Can certifiably say that Josh Dobbs having a career season through 4 weeks. Let's move to the Rams and talk about backup running back Ronnie Rivers. Kyron Williams has one of the more outrageous roles in the NFL among all running backs. He's getting like 20 touches, if not more, most of these weeks. He's 195 pounds. He's not all that explosive, but he's instinctual enough. He's played fine. He had 25 carries, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns in week 4. And Ryan, I'm inclined to believe that Ronnie Rivers might be able to do that as well, should anything happen to Kyron Williams. Ronnie Rivers had over 5 yards a carry on his 9 carries. He also caught both of his targets this past game. Maybe he's a desperation flex play for a couple of these bye weeks. And I think if Kyron Williams went down, what do you think he can handle most, if not all of that role?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, Josh. Let me start by saying this. Our waiver guy, Nick Bodiford, very smart guy, very sharp guy, super reliable for us. I think his best call to date has been Kyron Williams. That's one that I had no faith in, because I don't think he's not really a difference-making player, and the Rams lean into this a lot. He's a smart, reliable guy, just like Puka Nacua. So Williams is solid, but they're giving him a massive workload. And just, I think by, just over the wear and tear over the course of the season, there's a good chance Ronnie Rivers' role expands, if not fills in for Kyron Williams. And like you said, I don't think Williams is a particularly dynamic player at all. So production-wise, I think Rivers can at least get you 90% of what Williams has if Williams misses time.
As I mentioned a few times already, my rest of season tiered rankings will be on the 33rd team site tomorrow. Ryan, I got this question. I want to kind of get your thoughts on it because it involves Mr. Kyron Williams. People were wondering why I think Kyron Williams and Devon H. Chan are in a similar tier rest of season. And they were like, oh, like Kyron's getting so many more carries. And I was like, well, I actually think one of these guys, Kyron Williams, is a little bit miscast based on the archetype of running back he is. And I like that Achane has the big play ability. He plays in maybe the NFL's best offense at this point. He has better draft capital, kind of just a better overall prospect. And I think that he can kind of get it done with fewer touches, which is sort of what you're looking for. It's why we've liked guys like Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, like DeAndre Swift for much of his Lions career. Like the guys that can get it done in fantasy with 10, 12 touches are pretty exciting. Do you have anything to add there? And is that a crazy take that I think those two guys are similar enough players rest of season at this point?
No, it's actually a great question for me specifically because I'm an A chain kind of guy. I'm a guy who likes explosive, dynamic players and elite offenses. That's just I want that all the time, even if their role isn't exactly stable. Like I'm an upside player, so that's the kind of situation I'd lean into. But the truth is, with Kyron Williams, he's more like James Conner coming into the season. If I knew the Cardinals' offensive line was going to be this good, I would have taken more James Conner. That's what kind of got me off him a little bit. But it's the same kind of thing. It's Kyron Williams has been reliable. It's a question of can he hold up to this kind of workload over the course of the season. And my lean would be, I think, probably more likely not.
That's kind of how I feel too. Let me run through drops pretty quickly. I think in shallow leagues, you can drop Joe Burrow. 3 of his 4 games were under 10 fantasy points. His yards per pass attempt has been under 5.5 every game. He's generally been closer to 8 for his career. So massive down year. The offensive line hasn't been as great. He's had the calf issues. If you're in a deeper league, just keep holding him. But shallow leagues, I mean, he's just part of the streaming conversation at this point. It's like him and 10 other guys. I feel like we've never seen this many like kind of streaming types. There's like 8 reliable quarterbacks each week, and then like pretty much like a dozen dudes that you're just throwing in. It's like, oh, this guy's facing the Broncos. This guy's facing the Bears. This guy's facing the Titans. And you just kind of roll with him. I think Kyle Pitts is a drop in shallow leagues as well. The good, he has the highest average depth of target among all tight ends at around 12. That's like a downfield receiver type. Jalen Waddle was at an ADOT of 12 last year for context. We love that. We do not love that he's getting only 5 targets a game and catching 3 for 30 yards. That doesn't get it done in fantasy. Jonnu Smith's been surprisingly reliable. I hate that they have 2 tight ends pretty heavily involved in an offense that really can't even seem to support one. And you can drop Pat Freiermuth. He's got a multi-week hamstring injury. Told you guys to drop him last week. If you kept him this week, well, now you have a nice little out to just make that decision easier. If someone has dropped Quentin Johnston or Jackson Smith and Jigba because the Chargers and Seahawks are on bye, I would recommend picking them back up. One thing that we often see with rookie receivers is that after a bye week, they are more involved in their team's offenses. I think we're hoping that both are going to be more involved in their team's offenses come week 6. And then on the Chargers, I think we can drop Josh Kelley. Austin Eckler was starting to get practice a little bit in week 4. Now they get the week 5 bye. I assume he's back. If Kelley couldn't get it done in Eckler's absence, well, then I don't know why we're still holding him. Let's turn to quarterback streamers. Sam Howell. We don't like Sam Howell, but we like quarterbacks that play the Bears. Sam Howell has at least 18 fantasy points in all but one game. I mentioned on our Monday recap show yesterday, where we recapped all the week 4 action, that Sam Howell is pacing for 102 sacks taken. The NFL record in a single season is 76. This might be the get-right game where he does not get hit nearly as much from this non-existent Bears pass rush. Anything you want to add here about Sam Howell? Can we be excited finally about him in this matchup?
Yeah, Washington's a full 7-point favorite last time I looked. Like you said, the Bears have the worst pass rush in recent memory. And the other thing I'll be looking for in this particular matchup is if Jalen Johnson and Eddie Jackson are out again, Sam Howell's actually a great streaming option this week.
Yeah, I have him as a borderline top 12 option this week. As crazy as that sounds.
Yeah.
CJ Stroud versus Atlanta sounds less crazy. So if you're scared of Sam Howell, it's okay. There's CJ Stroud. At least 280 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns each of the past 3 weeks. At least 3 carries in every game. Scored 20 or more fantasy points each of the past 3 games. I wouldn't say the Falcons are necessarily a great matchup. That where Howell, it's a bet on matchup. Stroud, it's simply a bet on if he's on your waiver wire. That's just a pretty good option most weeks at this point. Anything to add on Stroud? I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, Stroud's been really good. The one wrinkle I'll throw in here is in fantasy, he's gotten there in each of the last 2 weeks on a 50-plus yard touchdown late in the game when the Texans were up by 2 scores. I don't really think that's sustainable at all. That said, Stroud, no one could have asked for more out of Stroud through his first 4 games in his career. Houston Texans fans have to be thrilled right now.
That's a good way to put it. I think that's how I kind of felt about like Justin Herbert. That's how I think we can feel about like Anthony Richardson as well. You kind of look and you go, you know what? Even if the wins and losses aren't necessarily great, we are very happy with what we've seen so far. I think Panthers fans at this point are kind of wishing they had simply taken CJ Stroud. Josh Dobbs, good streaming option against the Bengals simply because it's Josh Dobbs. He's averaging 17 fantasy points a game. Still has not thrown a pick this year. He's averaged 6 rush attempts per game. He's got a little sneaky mobility. He ran a 4.64 at the combine, which is the same as Travis Kelce. So there's a little bit of speed there. I don't know why Kelce was the first name that came to mind. There's probably other quarterbacks that had a similar 40 time, but you know what? Sometimes what's top of mind is not necessarily the best answer. Ryan, save me here. Talk to me about Josh Dobbs against our poor Bengals. We wanted to like them so badly.
Yeah. I said it yesterday. If some team signs Dobbs to like a 3-year, $30 million contract to be a backup, I think it might be a steal. He's been, he hasn't put up massive numbers, but he's been rock solid. And like you said, the rushing equity too against a Bengals team that they might beat. So if you're in a deep league, he's definitely not only a streaming valuable player this week, but maybe even going forward.
Hold your nose. We're about to recommend Zach Wilson. He faces the Broncos. We just watched him have his best game ever on Monday Night Football against the Chiefs, where he actually in many ways just outperformed Patrick Mahomes. I could tell there was some momentum there. We talked about it yesterday on our show. I think you can ride that momentum against a Broncos team that simply just doesn't cover receivers. And we know that Zach Wilson has the arm talent. It's always been the slow processing. And I think if there was ever a defense that would let a quarterback process things slowly, it would be the Denver Broncos.
I don't know what happened to the Broncos defense. I said this yesterday too, but like when they played the Bears last week, they were Cole Kmet, Darnell Mooney, DJ Moore. At least that's forgivable to a degree. Just guys with like 5-10 yard separation all day. So if Zach Wilson's going to have a game, this is the matchup. Plus there's the animosity with what Sean Payton said about Nathaniel Hackett. So I'm not as bullish on Zach Wilson's. They scored 20 points against the Chiefs when the Jets defense gave him a few turnovers in short field. So I'm not as optimistic as a lot of people about Wilson long term. But if he's going to do anything, it's going to be this week. And on top of that, Josh, what do you think about this? This is my hope if you have Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson has a monster game this week, and then you trade him.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think that is exactly how we should handle this. Ultimately, Garrett Wilson had 14 targets this past week.
Yeah.
And 15 fantasy points.
Yeah.
Come on, guys. This ceiling just really doesn't exist with Zach Wilson. I think if there was a ceiling that existed, I agree. Garrett Wilson, if he's going to score 20 fantasy points in a game this year, it's going to be week 5 against Denver. This segues nicely into our featured. We don't have a sponsor yet for this. If you want, hit us up, hit the DMs. This is our weekly news segment, the tight end streamer of the week, just so we can talk about our guy, the late round savior we needed, Tyler Conklin, who's averaged nearly 6 targets a game the past 3 weeks, averaging in that span 4 catches and 45 yards a game. If you, for some reason, need a quarterback and a tight end, the Zach Wilson-Tyler Conklin connection is not the worst thing that you can do this week, considering they're playing Denver. Anything to add here about the man with the wild hair who simply refuses to go down with arm tackles? We got to love Tyler Conklin.
Yeah, I love Tyler Conklin. This is the week to play him if you're going to do it. God, just please, Aaron Rodgers, come back next year just so we can see what Tyler Conklin can do.
Let's talk about a few defense streamers. Ryan's top 12 defenses with some write-ups about a few of his favorites will be included in my fantasy rankings that will hit the site very soon. So be on the lookout for that. The Lions host the Panthers. We just saw the Lions on national television this past Thursday really shut down the Packers offense for an entire half. They essentially just put them in the bag. Do you have any hope for this Panthers offense? I certainly do not in week 5.
No, the Panthers have been one of the hardest teams to watch so far this year. And yeah, Detroit's defense has been great in 3 or 4 games so far. I haven't done the rankings yet, but I expect they'll be a top 4 option this week for me in general.
Yeah, I kind of imagine they'd be there too. The Commanders, they host the Chicago Bears. We know Justin Fields takes a lot of sacks. Anything you want to add here about the Commanders in a game that, like you said earlier, they're favored by about a full touchdown at home?
Yeah, the Bears' offensive lines played reasonably well. I think better than a lot of people expected, including myself. That said, Washington's front four is a really tall order. So especially if the Commanders can play with any kind of a lead, they're a very strong option this week.
Lastly, before we get to a few bold takes that you have for week 5, the Dolphins host the New York Football Giants. You're a Giants fan, unfortunately. Yeah. I'm sure that fandom wanes at times. We all saw what happened last night. Are you expecting more of the same with this Dolphins team in week 5?
I think here's the thing with Daniel Jones. We're going to go back to his college days when they game plan for him to mitigate a dominant pass rush. He was better. Quick hitters, he's good with that. But if you make him his worst downfall is he has very poor instincts and pressure management. Last week, I think one of the problems is one, the Giants' offensive line is just not an NFL offensive line right now. A lot of injuries, a lot of bad play, but they against the 49ers, a lot of quick hitters, a lot of short throws. They protected Jones in that sense. That's why Eric Armstead's tweet made sense. But with Seattle, they tried to play him a little bit more straight up, and it was just a disaster. I think going forward now against the Dolphins and the Bills over the next 2 weeks, they're going to game plan for pressure in both of those games. So the Dolphins have huge upside in this matchup. I'm actually surprised the spread's only 10.5, if I'm being honest. But I don't think they are going to have far more quick hitters in this matchup. So I don't think 11 sacks is going to happen, but maybe 5-6 defensive scores certainly on the table too.
Yeah, you mentioned the spread where the Dolphins are 10.5 point favorites at home. Prior to last night, that was 9.5. Yeah. I think people watched the Giants on national TV, remembered it's going to be a short week for them after Monday Night Football, and said, you know what, 9.5 is not enough. We need to boost that to 10.5. Yeah. Everyone listening, if you like what you heard before we get to Ryan's bold predictions, make sure you follow him at Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. He is the better Ryan Reynolds. He is the more successful Ryan Reynolds. Tell him about all your European football team woes. He loves when you tweet at him after the other Ryan Reynolds team loses. So keep those coming. We find them hilarious. His power rankings are on the site. His matchups previews will be on the site later this week. The33rdteam.com. They'll be free. We'll have my fantasy rankings on the site later today. My tiered rest of season rankings and trade value chart will be on the site tomorrow. And hop into our free Discord, linked in both of our Twitters. From myself, from Ryan from the 33rd team, from Ryan's bold takes. Ryan, get us out of here and tell us what you're looking at in week 5.
I think this is underdog week, at least against the spread. The Jaguars are basically going to host the Bills in London. The Jaguars are staying in Europe. Buffalo's making the travel across the pond. I think Jacksonville gives them a tight game. The Steelers and the Ravens, Lamar Jackson's generally struggled against Pittsburgh's defense. I would like the Steelers if Pickett was available. I forgot that Trubisky's probably playing this week, so I'm a little bit more lukewarm on that than I was 20 minutes ago, Josh, but still that's one I have my eye on. I genuinely think the Cardinals beating the Bengals is a coin flip, which again, I would have never imagined that a month ago. But after watching the Titans front just dominate Cincinnati last week, the Cardinals are a high effort team. I think they have a shot against Cincinnati. I think the Jets go into Denver and beat the Broncos. I actually think Sean Payton kind of deserves it for trashing Nathaniel Hackett in public like that. Then the last one is the Minnesota Vikings did everything they could to lose to the Panthers last week. Kirk Cousins started the year with 3 300-yard games. He goes into Carolina, throws a pick six, a 99-yard pick six when they're going in. Only had 139 yards passing. But just the way this team works, they're 1-3. Their backs are against the wall. I don't think they beat the Chiefs, but I think they're going to give them everything they can handle.